Petrea not in yet.
And we'll let in Petrea. And we are being live streamed now.
I see that.
And you're going to record. Does it record it automatically then when you do that?
No, it does not. Hang on, let me find my recording button.
Hello, Petrea. You are muted.
Yep, and I will warn you right now that you will be. This is going live to the web, and it's being recorded. So before you venture any opinions on your part, just to make sure that you are fully aware. So you don't get caught out.
Yeah.
All right, here starts the recording part.
Okay. I'll just give it a second for the lag to catch up, as it often does.
Yes, it does take a little while.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the November 21st, 2021 Zoom event for the Winnipeg and 23 Bid Committee. Today, we are addressing the issue of the site selection vote ballot, which is provided by Discon 3. What is it? Why is it the way it is? And how do you go about filling it out? Today, we have Kevin Standley, who is an expert on that, a veteran of many Worldcons. Janie Shea is one of the vice chairs for the Winnipeg and 23 Bid Committee. Petrea Mitchell is joining us for the first time. Welcome, Petrea. And Sarah Bold is here, a friend of mine from Great Britain, who just filled out her very first Worldcon site selection ballot. So she and I are kind of here as the people who are going, why is it the way it is? What are we doing? So, Janie, who would you like to start off?
I think we can start off with Kevin's preamble of why this is the way it works.
Yes, sounds good.
Well, thank you for having me on. I have administered the elections to hold or to choose the side of a Worldcon before. I have bid for Worldcon a couple of times. I've been on winning Worldcon bids. I've been on losing Worldcon bids. And I've also been the manager of the part of the Worldcon that runs all those divisions. So I've got a lot of background in this, but I'm coming here today with, even though I've worked in those areas and I am this year, I'm more coming here essentially as an advocate for Winnipeg. I'm on the committee. And that's why I'm actually disqualifying myself from presiding over anything official at this year's election, because that would be unfair. Okay. So why are we even having this discussion? And that is because Worldcon is very different from most events that hold annual events or regularly scheduled events on choosing where do you hold that event. I mean, after all, the way the Olympics apparently work is if you bribe this group of people called the International Olympic Committee, they'll say you hold the Olympics. And people don't expect anything other than that. Most groups that have annual conventions either hold it in the same place every year, or if they do move around, well, some board of directors makes the decision. And Worldcon doesn't work that way. It's like a gigantic town meeting in a way. The members of the World Science Fiction Convention get to vote on where to hold their convention 2 years from now. It's highly democratic in that sense. And democratic doesn't necessarily mean free. You have to be a member. We're essentially a club. When you join the Worldcon, you are becoming a member of the World Science Fiction Society for that year.
And when that Worldcon is over, you rotate off the roster of members.
That's right. Once that Worldcon's over, your membership has expired. Your rights pretty much are done. But you're paying your membership dues. You might think of it as the basic cost, that is the minute, which was called the supporting membership, is $50. That makes you a member of WSFS. Now, if you want to come,
USD.
Sorry, US dollars 50, and I'm going to refer to US dollars everywhere in here because that's the way the ballot is denominated. And that's how it's a US based Worldcon, and they're charging US dollars. If the Worldcon is in Winnipeg 2 years from now, this whole discussion will happen in Canadian dollars. Mm-hmm. But the dues are $50 to become a member of WSFS, and that makes you a supporting member of the convention. To actually attend the convention, you have to pay the difference between that $50 and the attending membership price. This is similar to how my late father-in-law was a veterinarian. He was a member of the American Veterinary Medical Association. He paid his membership dues to that. But if he ever wanted to go to the AVMA convention, he had to pay the convention supplement. Anyway, so that's why there's money involved. Okay, because it's not a government, it's a private club, and you have to pay membership dues. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why. Okay, and we're going to be holding this year at Discon 3, the 79th World Science Fiction Convention. We are holding an election to decide where to hold the 81st Worldcon 2 years from now. I think that's the background.
Yeah. And of course, the thing is, too, that is on top of the supporting membership, you're paying the site selection fee, which is an additional $50 USD. Effectively, the way I understand it is kind of that makes sure that the people who are voting for this have skin in the game.
That's right. Because what you're doing is you're saying, yes, I have to be a member of this year's Worldcon to vote. But in order to actually cast a vote, I have to be prepared to pay my membership dues, my basic dues for the Worldcon, for WSFS, the World Science Fiction Society, 2 years from now. Yes. I'm not saying I'm going to go, but I have to buy my membership for that 2 years from now. And that's what that so-called voting fee is. It's actually, you are buying a supporting membership fee in advance.
Yes. And so basically when 2023 rolls around, you automatically have a supporting membership, and whoever wins for 2023.
That's correct.
And just to be clear, at the time of this broadcast, the two cities in the running are Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and Chengdu, China.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. So I guess that what I'd like to do, if it's okay with Janie and you, Kevin, is I'd like to go to Sarah for a minute and kind of ask Sarah, what did you think of the ballot? Like, how did you find it? Filling it out and stuff.
Well, I must admit, when I first saw it, I'm dyslexic, so I see things different anyway. And I found it a bit confusing. In some ways, it looks clear, but when I was coming down to like looking where you actually put the vote, I was going, where do you put it? Because when I've normally done any ballots or anything like that, we've always had a box. So I'm looking for a box on the paper going, why is there no box?
There's just like a line.
Just a line. So that confused me straight away because I thought I was missing something. I mean, is it always done that way? That
is a very good question, by the way, because we are not doing what's called first past the post voting, which is what most people are used to. To my knowledge, elections in the UK are that way. You get one choice. You put an X there, and whoever has more votes than anyone else wins. That's called first past the post. It's like a horse race. Mm-hmm. We don't do our elections that way. We do what's called, there are different names for it, but we use instant runoff voting or preferential voting, inaccurately called the Australian ballot because Australia does their legislative elections that way, to my knowledge. Mm-hmm. And the UK actually had a national referendum some years ago on whether or not to adopt that system and rejected it. There are good reasons for doing it. So the instant runoff voting works much better whenever you have more than two choices. Because imagine if you had 6 different cities running. If you used first past the post, in theory, you could poll 17% of the votes with 83% of the people voting against you. Am I doing my sums right? Yeah. And you'd still win because the other votes would be divided. Okay.
I mean, we do have on some occasions where we have preferential voting. We have had that on a few elections recently where we can put 1 to a 3, but it's always been a box.
Okay.
You know, you'll have like a page and there'll be a boxes all at the side. And then you just put first, second, third, etc.
And I would personally, backing Sarah up on this, I personally, as someone who I would have found that a little bit clearer as well, to have the box to put the number or the X or whatever.
I'd like to, what I'd better here, if I can bring it up on my computer, I got to find this year's ballot. And so it's easier to show than to tell.
Yes, very much so.
So,
but I mean, part of the reason why they're not all in a row, Sarah, is because at least looking at it from a formatting point of view as a graphic artist, the Winnipeg committee had so many people listed on the committee that you couldn't really like list them all one right after the other. You kind of had to put them aside.
Yeah,
you had to put them side by side.
All right. What I'm trying to do here is bring bring up a copy of the ballot. And that will usually be the case. And then that is something of a design constraint. The only way we could do it any other way would generally require that the ballot be more than 1 page long. And or more than 1 sheet of paper. And we have found, I've been through this before, is we've discovered that in general, if the ballot is more than a single sheet of paper long, then people will lose pages or get confused about it. The other thing is when you look at this if you actually open this in Adobe Acrobat in the Reader app, I could share that if you'd like, so you can put that up on screen. Then you actually, let me see here. Where's the share screen button?
Janie has to enable it.
Oh yes. May I share a copy of the ballot here so I can?
You should be already able to do that.
Okay.
Oh, there's share screen. I was on a smaller screen, so it was not visible.
Oh, okay.
So let's see if I could share this with you here. The site selection ballot and choose share. Okay. Are we seeing the ballot now?
Yes, I am. I'm seeing the bottom part of the ballot.
And that's the picture I'm showing. It may be a bit more obvious when you're actually looking at it in Adobe that there are boxes around the choices you have.
Yeah, but it's not at all obvious in the actual printed ballot.
And another thing we've discovered, because these ballots are often written by hand, the paper ballots are that way, that if you put a box, it will never be big enough. And you get people who think, oh, if I can't fit it inside this box, then my ballot will be disqualified. That's not true, by the way. I've always wondered, there's a lot of people who think there are gotchas in here, that the slightest mistake will disqualify your ballot. And no, I can tell you as an administrator, we are not trying to disqualify you. We really want your vote to count. A lot of it comes down to graphic design constraints when you come down to it. Also, the fact that this ballot design has been more or less been used for the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, so it's basically, it's inertia.
It is. We just, and we so there we go with that. All right. So it's the next. So that was the first question, and it's an understandable one, that there are all these choices on here. What else, Sarah?
Well, the other thing that I was a bit unsure on was about if you say only voting for one and you didn't want any other preference. I was a bit unsure whether I should write down at the bottom bit, because I started thinking, do I tick there or do I tick up here? Or
Well, I can answer that. As I have counted the ballots, I've been on both sides of the count. I've never had anything other than what I'm about to describe. If you just put a single mark, if you were just to put an X, let's say all you care about is Winnipeg winning, and if Winnipeg doesn't win, you don't care. You could just put an X in that box. That will count as a 1. The Winnipeg box. You could or the line, if you like, put an X by Winnipeg. And truthfully, I've seen people do all sorts of things on their ballots. They've written circles around the bid they want to bid, or they've then written it in as well, thinking that makes a difference. It doesn't. But the key element here is when we are actually counting the votes, what we are trying to determine initially is, what did the voter want as their first and main choice? And if you just put an X and you don't put anything else on the ballot, it's very obvious that that's all you cared about. I don't recommend doing it, but it'll work. Okay.
Now, I'm sorry, I'm unclear. What do you not recommend doing?
I don't recommend just putting an X. Okay. It's frankly, it slows us down slightly, because we have to stop and say, oh, okay, that's an X. We'll count it there. As opposed to we're looking at these ballots and we just say, okay, 1, 1, 1, 1, and we're just moving the ballots and stacking.
Okay, because that's not at all clear from the outside.
You can do it. You can mark it we'll count it. That's what we're saying. The way I would, even if I had no other choices, I would say 1 and leave the rest blank. Now, I think the key thing you need to do is when you're approaching this is you say, if the candidate I wanted the most doesn't win, do I have any preference at all? Okay. And if you do, then you want to include a second choice. For example, let us say you're saying, we'll use Winnipeg because we're talking about that. Let us say you say, if Winnipeg doesn't win, who would I want to win? And you might say, I don't want any of the other candidates on the ballot to win. I would rather that the World Science Fiction Society's business meeting, which is a gathering at the convention that in an extremis can select a site, but has not done so in since before I was born, I think, or maybe sometime in the late 60s after I was born, but I was only an infant then, so I have no memory of this. But let us say you actually didn't want anything else to win, then I would personally, I'd write a 2 next to none of the above.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
That's
you're then saying that if my first choice doesn't win, then I want my vote to count as none of the above. That's a way, if you like, of voting against everything else on the ballot.
And is also and is basically a way of saying, well, if Winnipeg doesn't win, I want the WSFA's business meeting to make the selection.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
You are not required to vote for things that are on the ballot. You may have noticed that Memphis's name is on here. They were bidding, they have withdrawn, but they'd already been on. The ballots were basically all the way on their way to print at the time they withdrew. Some group could write a name in of another bid. Now, in order for a write-in bid to win, they have to file the qualification papers, which are not difficult. I will say that, but a bid could run as a write-in. There have been very serious write-in bids that have placed very well. Back in 1990, there were 3 bids on the ballot: San Francisco, California; Phoenix, Arizona; Zagreb, which was still in Yugoslavia at the time.
Would have been.
And there was a bid that filed for Hawaii after the deadline for being on the ballot, and they ran as a write-in bid, and they actually came in second after San Francisco.
Wow.
So they came in ahead of Zagreb and Phoenix.
Wow.
That was the order of finish. I was in the counting room for that as a San Francisco representative. But I know of no serious write-ins. There are many hoax write-ins, which don't need to go into at this point, but they are part of the bidding process.
And some of them are quite funny, I have to say.
They are. That's right. Yes.
But because science fiction fans certainly don't lack a sense of humor.
Correct. You're absolutely right. So there's where we go. What else, Sarah? Were there other things that confused you about the ballot?
I mean, I must admit, seeing the ballot paper in this format is actually easier because you can see the highlighted parts.
Yes.
Would it be possible maybe on a future ballot to actually just put those in a color field? It
could be.
I mean,
I'll have to remember that the next time I'm in a position to influence the ballot design.
I think
might be 2 years from now.
I mean, personally speaking, from a position like Sarah, where I have never really seen a ballot like this before, and I'm just like, huh? Having those fields in light blue or probably light blue would show up best. But having them in light blue would make it much easier to comprehend exactly where the marks are supposed to go.
Well, it'd probably be a very light gray because ballots are normally going to be printed black and white, but I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, a light gray would work too, just something to give a little visual cue. Right.
And Sarah, I forgot to mention to begin with, I said I am sympathetic to the situation you're in. My late sister was dyslexic, severely learning disabled, and she had the misfortune of going to school with the school prodigy, Muggins here. But Kelly was, so I've lived with that my life as well. So I apologize that we've come up with confusing designs, and I'll try and remember to take this in mind. And again, the next time I have something to do with the ballot design, I'll see if we can do something to make it a little bit easier.
Sarah, I have a quick question for you. As somebody with dyslexia, would a form like this that had those blue fields in a light gray be easier to read for you?
A lot easier, because black and white just swirls to me.
Okay, it would probably be a great grayscale, but at least it would be a more contrasting space. I want to ask if you had any problems with the upper part of the ballot, filling in those fields.
Yeah, the other thing I found a little bit, I didn't know it was strange rather than a problem as such, was the voting token. Because when you actually get your voting token, which I was like trying to work out what the heck it was, but when it was more like a password to me,
That's
I wasn't.
approximately what it's called. Yes. I mean, it's
I
called a
was.
token, but it's a code.
I was sort of looking at it and going, "What's a token?"
Yeah, to me, token denotes something physical. I
again,
think voting password might be a little bit more comprehensible, at least to me.
it's probably the case. I have to admit, this is another case of where some years of inertia have come into mind. The terminology has been used for the last few Worldcons since we have gone. There's been a lot more cases of people voting online by paying an amount and then getting the confirmation of payment.
Yeah. See,
So
to me, the word, as I say, token denotes something physical. Password or code would be much more comprehensible.
that's another good idea. That again, if I have some involvement in the design of the ballot 2 years from now, which is possible, then we can, and I'll try and remember to suggest it to our successors, because I am a member of the Discon 3 committee in the division of the convention that runs WSFS business. I'm just not responsible for the election itself.
Now,
I'll try and pass this on.
Is this the kind of thing that would require voting at 2 WSFS meetings?
Oh no, none of that stuff about voting tokens. That's not legislative terminology. It's
Okay, good.
it is all a matter of how the administrators are dealing with the prospect of getting information, payment, and so on. Basically it's people are just taking on. They're doing what has been done in the past, and so they're just adopting the same terminology that someone originally picked.
Yeah. One thing I did want to note, and it confused me initially, even though I've been to many conventions, was the badge name slot. I would personally suggest that you add an optional in there somewhere, because people who've never done this kind of thing before might think you have to have a badge name, and of course you don't.
Yeah, and all good ideas. And what you're again seeing is a case of a lot of this stuff is aimed at the regulars, as you like. People who've been members for years and years understand our own jargon. You're right. The jargon can be confusing, and the words optional. What happened is, in fact, I may be responsible for this, because it's possible I'm the one who added that field. I'd have to go look. I may have been the one who added that field one of the years I was administering the election. And so it's just sort of stuck. But thank you.
Well, that's okay. I just wanted to point out, because like I say, I've been to many conventions, and it even caught me by sort of like, huh? Do I have to? So.
Yes, of course, the answer is no, you don't. It's optional. If you leave it blank, we just use whatever name you put in the name field. Mm-hmm. But there are people who, as you may know, are highly passionate about this. About that particular thing, and that is a completely different discussion that I have written about, so we won't go there. Another question I had was, I'm going to guess, Sarah, that you actually printed the ballot. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say actually is, how you brought this up in PDF?
Yes.
Is how come you can't actually fill it in
as it is? It's not fillable.
You've got to print it off, fill it in, and then, in my case, photograph it and take it, and pass it on by email.
That's not actually the case. I mean, I have it open in Adobe Acrobat Reader, and you can fill these fields in.
Really?
Let me do. Yeah.
Yeah, give us a demonstration, because
I
haven't downloaded it yet. So
if you open this up, even in Reader, you do not have to have the full-blown. I mean, Reader is the free application, and you do need the most recent version, probably, or a relatively recent version, but you don't have to have the full-blown pay for it Acrobat. This will work in Adobe Reader. I'm going to go ahead and fill this in. I have, since it's just a PO box, I don't really care if people know what my address is.
Well, this suppose really is the way it was described, as though you couldn't do that.
I'm not sure. I'm gonna. And the only issue, it comes down to the signature field. And I'm going to go ahead and you could go, and these other things here are said about, I'll go ahead and fill it part way out here. And this is a slightly earlier version of the document. There is one thing about this. Due to an error in production, when they turned it into a PDF, they forgot to make this little checkbox here
clickable. Oh,
but it doesn't matter. If I just, the administrators, again, are not looking for reasons to disqualify you. They're not even looking at, they're frankly not even looking at this. They're just saying, does this piece of information match up to a payment record that we have? If so, we're going to count it. If not, we won't. All right.
okay.
And then, and I'll go ahead and put some information in here. And let us say, and again, I'm advocating for Winnipeg here. I'm voting 1 for Winnipeg, and I'll put a 2 by none of the above, and I'm gonna leave the rest blank.
Okay.
Now, since we are aiming this at a general audience, I want to explain some other things in here. None of the above means I don't want anything on this ballot to win. I want the business meeting to decide. That's what none of the above means. It has a real meaning. It is a candidate. It is not an abstention. An abstention is a vote for nobody at all.
No preference.
And it's no preference. That's why no preference is different than none of the above. No preference is the same as if you didn't even vote. It's an abstention. It doesn't even count as a cast ballot. There are reasons for voting no preference. For example, if you should happen to have a membership in the name of a guest or a club or an organization or your stuffed animal. None of those people count as what are known as natural persons. You can't vote. You can cast a ballot, you can vote at no preference, and it doesn't affect the race. Even if there were 10,000 votes for no preference and 1 for Winnipeg, Winnipeg still wins. Okay? And write-in, we already discussed, so that's how. So this is
so basically, no preference means I have no choice whatsoever.
That's
None of
right.
the above means I want the WSFS business meeting to decide, and those are 2 very different things.
That is very much the difference, yes. And so, and another element of this is if we ever get to no preference on your ballot, if you've numbered something below that, doesn't matter. No preference is the end of the line. Your ballot is now out of the election entirely.
Okay.
All right.
So you can fill in any other field, but if you click anything in no preference, it's out.
That reaches the end of the line. For example, if I did it this way, you can see that here, and Winnipeg was eliminated. Well, now my ballot is eliminated because my second preference is no preference, which means it's out. I'm never going to get to none of the above. It's not accessible on the ballot.
What if you do it the other way?
Oh, the other way is
3 and 2.
Yes. And I'll show you that. I'll tell you one of the things about 3 and 2 means that if somehow none of the above were eliminated, your ballot is now blank and goes into no preference. And it turns out that this is exactly the same as putting a 3 in no preference, because after none of the above is eliminated, if it is, and we count the ballots, and if somebody has a majority of all the ballots with preference, they win. If nobody does, then we take the smallest stack of ballots and take their next preferences. And that's why it's called instant runoff, because we're basically doing runoff elections.
Yeah.
But no preference and a blank ballot are the same thing. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter, but people get unhappy if you don't give them a way to explicitly say, I don't care.
Yeah.
So we provide it. All right. So I've filled out all my preferences on this ballot here. And the only thing left to do is sign it. And this has been something that, I don't think a lot of people, I'm going to guess a lot of people were really unaware of this. Of course, one way to sign your ballot is to print it out, physically sign it, scan it, and email it. Mm-hmm. One of the things people may not be aware of, and this is an Acrobat Reader. Up here at the top, I've got to find the right button. Here.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about.
There it is. See where it says here, sign document.
Yes, by drawing a signature or typing.
Now you could sign the ballot your own way, or you could just use that and do that.
Now, how do you put that image into the reference library for the program?
You don't need to put it. Well, I don't know how that works, because I just use that. That is not my handwritten signature. That's the default signature that Acrobat uses based on my name.
Gotcha. Okay.
There may be other way.
So that's their default font for signature.
Essentially, they form a signature out of it.
Gotcha.
Okay. And that will, that'll be counted. Okay.
Okay.
That would be the way you would do that. And then you wouldn't even have to print it. You could just save this document and then email that document.
Yeah, exactly. Now, what format would it be saved in? PDF?
PDF.
Okay.
And then you just send the PDF in based on the instructions. That's that.
Yeah. Now, another way to do this, coming from an Adobe Photoshop background, is you can take the PDF, you can export it into JPEG form.
Yes.
And then you can basically use the text function in Photoshop to type everything in. And you can actually use the pen tool in Photoshop to sign, if you have a Wacom tablet and you're not like, just using a mouse, which is kind of like writing with a brick. And then basically you can do it that way. And then you can do print on that document and choose the save as PDF option from the print dialog box. And then that will give you a PDF, which should be suitable for sending in.
Agreed. And those are all usable ways. I'm looking at this as the least
stressful.
Difficult. Well, it has the least number of pieces of software, particularly software you have to buy.
Yes.
Because this can be done with just the free version of the program.
Well, I mean, Photoshop does have free versions out there, especially the ones that used to be delivered with printers, like every time you turned around. Photoshop, I don't remember what it was called, but it was basically Photoshop Lite. And you could use that for that too.
I didn't want to go too much down the technological rabbit hole. There's more than one way to do it. And of course, you can do what Sarah did, which is print, physically sign, fill it out, scan, photograph or scan, any way the administrator can read it.
I have a quick question.
By the way, that's the last thing I have about the ballot itself. Did you want me to keep it up here, or should we?
I just had a quick question.
Yes.
Now, a photograph of the entire ballot, which is an 11 by 14, or 8.5 by 14, I believe, might be a little bit small to read. Can we photograph it in 2 sections and send them 2 photographs?
You don't really need to photograph the backside of the ballot. It can be done because it includes these extra fields that are used just so they're tracking it. But the only part of the ballot that is really necessary for your ballot to be counted is the side of it. Okay. And if you do, and by the way, the mechanics, you are having to trust the administrators because that is their job to administer the election. This is very similar to how when you cast a Hugo Award ballot, you are trusting that in fact this year, I and the other 3 people who are on the Hugo Administration Subcommittee aren't doing anything nefarious with your votes. That sort of thing. You have to trust your administrator, basically.
Well, I mean, the thing is, too, though, from what I understand, Janie said that they might be roping me into counting duties if I make it to Discon. And from what I understand, they're basically, correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to the ballots, pile of ballots, right, hasn't been counted yet. It goes first to one pair of counters, who basically is a representative from each bid.
Yes.
They go through it, they come up with numbers, and then they pass it on to a second set of counters, again, one person, a 2-person team, one from each bid. And they, in a sense, ratify it.
That is one of the ways it's been done. Another way that I'm actually more fond of, it's a little slower on the first count, but it's faster overall. And I've done it all these ways, I will add, both as an administrator and as a voter. And the method that we used the last time that I was involved in an election as a bidder, which was the election for choosing WesterCon, which works approximately the same way. And I was I was the head of the bid for Tonopah, Nevada, but we were bidding against a bid from the Phoenix area. I'm going to say Phoenix. I forget the exact location, but the way that worked was we have the bidders on one side of the table, and on the other side is one of the administrators' staff. Okay. We typically have divided the ballots up into multiple days and groups so that it's so that's why we need multiple counters in there. But what happens that I'm familiar with in this is that the person who is administering the election unfolds the ballot. By the way, keeping in mind that when this ballot reaches you, it will have already been folded in half. The administrator will have validated the information for the mailed-in ballots. At the convention, the ballot is actually separate from the top section.
Okay. So you don't have any identifying information, you just have the vote.
Right. Yes. Once you reach this point, long before you're actually counting it, the lower half, the section where the ballot will basically have been cut in half where the solid line is.
Gotcha.
And it will have been folded on the dotted line to make it harder to see when loose ballots are in place, okay?
Which means that basically when the ballots come to the counters, they are effectively unknown quantities. They're just
Correct.
these folded pieces of paper that you can't read yet.
That's right. That's a good point about that I forgot I should have mentioned. But you will have only had the bottom half of the ballots. The administrator will unfold the ballot, look at it, and say, I believe this is a vote for Winnipeg, for example, and show it and put it on the table in front of them. And the voter and the bidders' representatives will probably say yes, because in most cases you say agree, and that goes pretty fast. And then if it's Winnipeg, he then puts it in the Winnipeg pile. I believe this is a vote for Chengdu. And yes. Okay. I believe this is a vote for somebody who really, really wants Memphis. And everyone will roll their eyes and say yes, and that goes in the Memphis pile, and so on. And you just keep looking at each one. Or occasionally, I am not certain of what this ballot is saying. We'll lay it down. And now the bidders need to discuss what they think happened here.
So in effect, you have 7 piles, really.
Well, probably. There might be, but you'll actually end up with one for each write-in bid as well. So you could have 20 or 30 of them. You could. Okay. It doesn't normally happen, but it could. Okay. But you're going to make piles of ballots. I mean, there are ballots where people just cannot figure it out, and they'll do weird stuff with the ballot. And either the administrator plus the bids can work out what they all agree is what the voter's preference was. Mm-hmm. And then we'll count it that way. Possibly we might have to say, I can't figure this out. And the head administrator might get involved. I said, come on over here. Tim, come over here and have a look at this. What do you think? And there's one other alternative, which is there is no way to determine what this voter's preference was because they have done such an awful job of voting. I will say you could expect 1 or 2 of those in every election. And if that happens, it's what we would call technically, it's an illegal vote. It counts as a vote having been cast because they did try to vote, but it's not a vote for any site, and it's not even a vote for no preference. It's a vote we can't figure out. The only reason that ever matters is because it counts toward the total number of ballots cast for the purpose of determining what a majority is.
Okay.
I have never been in an election where 1 or 2 ballots of that sort would ever make a difference, but I have seen elections where it got close. There have been WorldCon elections. It was a NASFIC, which is a similar convention, where the margin was 7 votes between the two major candidates.
Wow.
So every vote can make a difference. That's a key element to remember.
Okay.
So anyway, we just go through all the ballots, and most of the ballots, I'm going to say all but a handful of them, it's going to be pretty obvious how the person voted. And then we divide them up into the various piles. And after we've all determined what we are, then we count them. Now, that is the case where what we typically will do is one group will count, like the people will count them, and then another group will count just to make sure.
So basically, so one from each bid, in a sense.
Yeah, we'll always. All of the things having to do with the bids need to have to have, well, not just pairs, one person from every bid committee plus an administrator has to be involved in that.
So in the case of this one, it would probably be 3.
It would be 3 people total. And and because we typically count the votes, there's one group counting the advance votes, like the one you cast, Sarah, and then one for each of the 3 days of voting. There's a Wednesday, a Thursday, and a Friday voting. And we typically count those each separately and report them separately, but you have to merge them all together to get the total votes.
I do have a question.
Yes.
If somebody mounts a serious write-in bid campaign where the proper paperwork has been filed.
Yes.
What if nobody from that bid is actually a discount?
That is up to the administrator to decide. Okay. And I know how I would rule on it, having been an administrator, because I know what the language in the Constitution is. And that is the bids are permitted a minimum of 2 people. That's in the Constitution. And typically these days, we usually, as administrators, ask you to send 4 because we've got 4 groups of people counting and it speeds things up.
Okay.
I have been in an election where only 1 came. And that was there was only 1 person in the room besides me. And that was because it was an uncontested race. There was 1 bid. The chair of that bid came, and it took us a little bit longer because we had to deal
Only
with
2 people.
We only had the 2 of us. We had to go through everything 4 times, and it just slowed things down a little bit. However, admittedly, in an uncontested race with no serious competition, minor irregularities are unlikely to get anybody excited because it won't change the result.
No.
So there's the
Okay.
answer to that. It is the bids are allowed to send representatives, but they're not required to.
Okay.
If you don't show up, you are essentially saying, "Oh, you folks figure it out. I don't care."
Okay. That's what I wanted to know was basically what are the provisions for people who, for whatever reason, can't show up for the count?
Yeah, that's pretty much what it comes down to. And there may well be cases where, for example, a bid, a lightly staffed bid who doesn't even have enough people to send. When you need 4, I don't have 4. I've got 2. I'll bring 2. Okay.
Okay.
That is something that has to be worked out with the administrator. It could probably slow the result down, but if nobody shows up, well, then the other groups are assumed to know what they're doing.
Mhm.
The bidders are supposed to be watching each other.
Yeah, that's why they're keeping tabs on each other in a sense.
That's right. And that's one of the reasons why the bidders are asked to send people to staff the voting area. Same reason. Now, when you're there, you can go ahead and wear your bid t-shirt or something like that, but you cannot advocate for your bid. No electioneering.
Yeah. Which is one reason why I will be at the fan outreach table and somebody else will be in the voting area. Because in a sense, I am there to advocate.
I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this ballot unless you or Sarah have any other questions.
No. I was going to say, when you were saying about essentially, do you have like an observer on the account? Because I know you said about having like bit representation from the bids and everything.
The observer is one of the people who's involved in the administration of the bid of the election. That's people from, in this case, Discon 3. There's an area head, who's head of site selection, and his name is Tim. He has staff who work for him. There will be staffers. There will be part of staff. They are not part of any bid. And indeed, even if they happen to support one personally, it's
irrelevant.
It's not relevant here, but it's generally a good practice for them to not wear bid paraphernalia other than probably a bid ribbon. And I know it's been my experience when I have been in one of those neutral positions, I will go to, if I'm going to get ribbons or stickers, I'm going to get them from all the bids. So I treat them equally.
Put them all on your badge.
Either all of them or none of them. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so I was wondering whether it was a similar thing, because I've actually, I mean, it's for like elections for the country sort of thing. I've been an observer, and obviously I've double checked counts to make sure that the vote is what that person's voted essentially. So I thought it was something similar.
It is very similar to that. It would appear to me that I am that this wanting to administer elections and be fair about it runs in the family, because my aunt was the deputy county clerk for elections for Yuba County, California, for her whole career working in the county. So, yeah.
I do have a question though, in terms of bid reading what is on the bid, considering that some of our votes may be coming from China, and considering that the Chinese bid members might not. I am trying to try and acquaint myself with the Chinese numbering system. And I'm hoping that my Chinese counterparts, if I'm in the vote counting room, will have done the same with the Western counting system. Yes. But will there be someone there to kind of verify? In a sense, say I can't read any Chinese at all, and some of the Chinese submitted ballots are, in that type of written language.
That's a good question for which I do not have an answer. This is
Okay.
one where I would then say, ask the administrator.
Okay, that's fair.
I do note that the instructions, not the ballot proper, but the instructions for the bid for the election were made in, I believe, 4 languages.
It
Three.
was English.
English, French, simplified Chinese, and I
Yeah.
thought it was in Spanish as well, but
It
I'm
was.
not
It
certain.
wasn't. It was in Spanish. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
that's right.
Yeah.
I also expect, again, this has never been an issue that I'm aware of, but whenever there's any doubt, the official language is going to be English. That's the version that will matter. I've had to deal with that
Okay.
at the business meeting. We've had the Constitution translated into French and Japanese that I'm aware of, but English is the working language in case of any
Okay.
doubt.
Okay, but in the case of a ballot which is entirely filled out using non-Western characters, I just kind of want to make sure that there's somebody there who can actually say, yes, this is what you think it is.
I would definitely think that that's something you're going to have to ask Tim, the administrator, about, because I do not know the answer to that one. Yes.
Okay, that's fair.
And I see a question there in the chat about how important is it to fold the ballot at various points. And the answer is, it is not critical. We're not going to disqualify a ballot because you've misfolded it. Okay. It's in your own best interest to fold it that way. Unless there are people who I know who don't care if people can see how they voted. That's up to them. Folding on the dotted line for the paper ballot, when you mail a paper ballot or cast a paper ballot at the convention, that is entirely up to the voter to deal with that. The main reason for folding it that way is to help us to administer. That's all.
Okay. So here's a question then. What will disqualify a ballot, aside from what's already been mentioned?
I can't think of much of anything that would, other than, okay, I mean, the things if you cast a ballot where you don't include a voting token, okay, now I will say this, I don't know, because I have never actually administered an election where we had the voting token system in place. Back in those days, it was, you included a check or money order, basically. And but it's a lot more, we are a lot more worldly now, and therefore we've had to include things that don't just work in the US. I was in charge. I wasn't the administrator, but I was the manager of the administrator for the election that took place in Winnipeg in 1994. And we were taking voting in Canadian and US dollars. In those days, we said, well, just write your credit card. Your credit card could be used. You put your credit card information on the ballot. We did not have this voting token system. But if you haven't paid and we cannot figure out whether you paid, then your vote's not going to get counted because you did have to do that. Let me think now. That would be a reason for it. If the convention is unable to figure out whether you're a member of the convention, then of Discon 3, then your vote's not legal. So we can't, because you have to be you have to be both a member of the current Worldcon and be prepared to buy your membership for 2 years from now.
So basically you have to have both an existing membership and your voting token.
That's right. And remember, it only has to be at least a supporting member of the current convention. You do not have to attend the Worldcon. You do not have to buy the expense of attending Worldcon membership. Only the supporting membership. So
now, what about
go on. I was going to basically say it is, if you're starting from nothing, it's going to cost you $100 to vote, $50 to join Discon 3, and $50 more to pay the voting amount for 2 years from now.
To get your token.
To get your token and your membership for 2023.
What if your ballot is not actually signed?
Yeah, if your ballot is not signed,
because some people are forgetful. They'll miss that field.
And I'm afraid that is a case where the rule, it does say right on the ballot, and this is one where I know I would have to, unless there is some clear and obvious reason. It doesn't necessarily have to be this nice, pretty signature I have. anything at all that the administrator's been prepared to accept as a signature would count.
So
But
for
if you-
example, maybe initials, for example,
Initials, squiggles, something, okay,
in that field.
in that field. Again, that is something where the administrator is going to have to make the call. But I believe I would face it as saying, if that signature is left blank, it says right on it, I have to count that as no preference.
Okay.
And I've been in the voting room on this when we've had situations where a small number of cases where we have had ballots, the administrator has brought to our attention ballots that are hard to adjudicate for that reason, and if it has come down to saying this has got to be considered no preference, this is the only case where anybody is supposed to have can mark the ballot other than the voter. I know of a case, for example, where the administrator brought a rather odd color of pen. I'm not even going to say what color it was, lest I give anybody ideas. Brought an oddly colored pen and said, first of all, I'd like all of you who have writing material, go put it away, keep it away from the table. And secondly,
Yeah.
if I have to mark one of these ballots, I'm going to use this color and this color only, so that you can tell that I've had to override the voter.
I was just about to ask what system they used to ensure that it was an administrative override, and that answers that question.
Because we are still doing all of this on paper. We're voting on paper. We're counting it on paper. It doesn't actually take that long. A couple of hours is most. The only time it's ever taken more than a couple hours, to my knowledge, is back in 1991, when it took 14 hours. And the reason it took 14 hours is because the administrator hadn't been checking off the voters' names as they voted.
Oh.
And it took us 12 hours to go through all the ballots, 2,107 of them.
Oh.
Says I, one of the people in that room.
The number is burned into your memory.
Burned
forever.
into my brain. We had to go through those 2,107 ballots and check. And by the way, this is a case where the top and bottom portions of the ballot were not separated.
Oh.
Okay, because we had to do the validation. So we were having to validate the name, separate the ballot, and then it took 2 hours to count.
So normally in the counting room now,
Yes.
In a sense, the name and the membership have been validated, and all we
Yes.
get in the counting room are the folded bottom portion of the ballot with no identifiers attached, just
That's
the
correct.
votes.
That
Okay.
is correct. Yes. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to give the name, but we sat there for quite a while staring at these piles of ballots, trying to decide what are we going to do. And we were trying different things. It turns out searching them on my computer would have taken longer than just looking it up on the paper lists.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the very first ballot up there, now it was folded over, so you couldn't see how they voted. But the very first vote was for somebody who was rather prominently known in WorldCon societies. It's all of us were saying, no, I'm not going to look. I'm not going to look.
Look.
Ethics, people. You know. And I was very happy when we were able to start separating those ballots, because that way we didn't have.
You didn't have to
That's
put
right.
a blinder on for that part.
You didn't have to watch out for people who'd done their folds wrong, or things had got, or if the tape had come off, or things like that. Better not to know.
Yeah.
What you do not know, you cannot be compelled to reveal.
Very true. I guess I just wanted to ask Sarah, was there anything else about the ballot that you'd like to mention, or the voting process, or anything like that?
Is it always every 2 years?
No, we choose 2 years in advance. WorldCon
Right,
is
okay.
held every year, but we choose the site 2 years in advance.
So next year we'll be voting for 2024.
That's correct.
Right.
Yes. Now, at the moment, there is only one known candidate, but there's a lot of time for people to get involved. The deadline for filing a bid is sometime in, I think, it's actually less time than I think, because the schedule's compressed with the WorldCon so close to it into the year. The next filing deadline is sometime in February, I believe. But the only bid that I'm aware of that is considered a serious bid that is likely to file
Is Glasgow.
is Glasgow. But the very existence of the Winnipeg bid, which was very late in the process, shows that something could show up at any time, even right on the deadline.
Yeah. But right now, as many people have said, Sarah, it's going to be rather interesting if Glasgow wins for 2024, because in 1994, at the Worldcon in Winnipeg, we handed the gavel to Glasgow.
That would be a really interesting coincidence.
So if they win in 2024, and Winnipeg wins in 2023, we will once again be passing the gavel to Glasgow.
I also, going back to that, because I was a member of the Glasgow committee, I was one of the 2 deputy chairs of the Glasgow convention. By the way, I had a whole lot more hair back there in 1994. I look at pictures of me and say, who is that kid? Anyway, that was, I think, the first time, I'd have to be sure, I think it's the first time that there were 2 consecutive non-US Worldcons. That because every time it had gone US to somewhere else and back to the US, or multiple US ones in a row. But that was starting the period when you were seeing the Worldcon was becoming more worldly, to the extent that what we have this year and next year, where there are 2 consecutive years with US sites, is almost an exceptional case.
Yeah, because I think recently the longest US run has been something like 3 years, at least recently.
I think so. I'd have to go look at it, but certainly since around 1990, it has been a case of where it's been almost, there's a lot of back and forth. I actually remember also being told by somebody along in the mid 2000s saying, well, that bid for so and such is illegal. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, because the rules say the Worldcon has to be in the US and then non-US, and then the US and the non-US. And I said, that is not the rule. What it was is that just happened to be what we had happen the last 4 or 5 years. And people who were new to the process looked at the last 5 years and thought they were all that way. I said, no, it's not actually. It is actually a fairly simple thing, is that any place more than 800 kilometers, that's about 500 miles, from the place where the election is happening, any place other than from outside that zone is eligible.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's it. Draw a circle, great circle distance of 800 kilometers around the spot where the administration is happening. And the primary legislative reason for that tends to be it's trying to, within that 800 kilometer zone was the so-called 1-day drive distance. You could call it different things than that, but it's from a theory point of view, we don't really want to have people just voting, oh, well, it's right next door, so I'll vote for it because it's easy.
So basically voting within their preferred region, in a sense.
Yeah, if you like. Okay, I mean, that's what it amounts to. It used to be a different way of doing it, but for the last 20 plus years, it's been we choose the site 2 years in advance, and everywhere more than 800 kilometers from the site administering the election is eligible.
Okay.
There are oddities in that, because people have said, well, look at but Chicago, it actually is further than 800K, but Chicago is relatively close to DC, and but let us say the Worldcon next year was going to be in Philadelphia, which is very definitely less than 800 kilometers from DC. That's legal. The elections were not held. DC didn't choose that site. The elections were held more than 800K away.
Gotcha. And again, it's down to that 2-year gap, right?
2-year gap. We used to select the sites 3 years ahead of time, and going even further back, and before I got involved, it was only 1 year in advance. Well, you bear in mind.
Administratively, that's a pretty short period of time to put together something like a Worldcon.
Yeah, but in those days, the Worldcon was fewer than 1,000 people. It was a lot simpler. We went to a longer lead time I don't know exactly which year it happened, but I believe it was in the early 1970s. There was then a period of time in the late 80s where we went to 3 years because it was thought it would be easier to negotiate sites. That proved, I was involved in a 3-year bid, the 1993 Worldcon bid for San Francisco. It proved that 3 years isn't long enough, but it's also too long for most organizing of a Worldcon, because what happens is you spend a year just thrashing around. You can't really get to work on your convention because it's too soon, and you waste a lot of energy that way.
And
so we went back to, and you lose people. They get bored and so on. So it's back to 2 years. And furthermore, there is something, those of us who've done this a lot of running WorldCons and so on, there's some thinking that it actually takes less than 2 years. It really should only take about 18 months. Well, guess what? This year and the next 18 months following December, we're going to test that and find out, is that true or not?
Okay, I think that answers my question. Sarah, did you have anything else to add?
No, I think I've pretty much covered everything there.
Well, I'm really pleased, Sarah, that you've gotten involved. I'm going to take a guess that you might be interested in being involved in voting next year. You might have some preference in that election.
It's a bit nearer.
Coming up. Yeah. Well, how far away is Glasgow from you?
Depending on the traffic, about 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah. Oh, nice and close.
Drive.
Yeah.
Well, speaking from a North American perspective, that's nice and close.
It is.
Well, I mean, if I'm in the northwest, it's like not that far up to Glasgow at all. Mm-hmm. I've driven that way before a few times.
I was involved in the previous Glasgow WorldCon. I was the head of the division of the convention that managed the major events like the Hugo Award ceremony, the masquerade, the opening and closing ceremonies, and so forth, and also the WSFS functions. So site selection reported to me. And then going back to the Glasgow WorldCon before that, I was the chairman of their business meeting.
Oh boy!
So I've been involved in this for quite a while, actually. So
and 2 Glasgows.
But I was on the committees of both Glasgow WorldCons. The last one, I was a member of the executive committee I was a director basically in legal terms, which meant that I got those pieces of paper that said on Her Majesty's service from the UK government because I was a director of the corporation. So there were papers I had to sign and so forth,
Wow.
It helped on the resume. I could say director of a UK corporation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Or are you kidding? Whatever volunteering I do for the Winnipeg bid, as well as whatever function I serve at Winnipeg WorldCon itself, if we win, I'm putting on my resume.
Yep.
Right there, man.
I will say that I did chair the 2002 WorldCon in San Jose. I was co-chair. And I had coworkers who sort of chuckled at, you're running you're running one of those sci-fi conventions. And I said, how about chief executive officer of a 5,000 person international literary conference with a budget of over $1 million US? And they said, ooh.
Exactly, that guy. Petrea, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Did you have any questions or anything you would like to add?
No, I think it's been covered very well. I will say I've been on site selection staff myself in 2018, but that was a year in which we had 2 elections, but they were both uncontested because we also had the election for NASPIC. But I think Kevin's described it all very well.
Excellent.
2018. Well, in that case, Petrea, as the WSFS division manager of the San Jose WorldCon in 2018, thank you very much for helping.
You're welcome.
Your boss's boss reported to me, basically, or something like that. Your boss reported to me. Sorry, I lost track. Yes, WorldCon runs completely on volunteers. We cannot do it without the help of hundreds of people. There are actually more people volunteering to put on a WorldCon nowadays than attended the first WorldCon in New York City in 1939.
That was something like 200 and something people?
That's right.
Yeah. And look how far we've come.
Yeah.
Janie, did you have anything to add?
Oh, only something very frivolous when you guys were talking about signatures. It occurred to me, since Chengdu is one of the bids, is if they've considered or if they have a policy of acceptability for if somebody decides to use their personal seal.
Their chop
as their signature. Their chop.
Very good question.
I know that I would always accept a chop as valid because I know what it's for.
Yes, so would I.
I would.
Right, but how do you know that it's that person using their personal chop, or if it's somebody else using theirs chop?
Well, I
mean, you'd have to ask the administrator. You could. I was going to say, how do we know somebody hasn't forged a signature on someone's ballot without checking with them?
especially if it's like what Kevin showed, which is basically it's a default font in their program that they're using to write their signature.
There have been relatively, in fact, I don't even recall, there's been some weird cases with the Hugo Awards, but there has never been any sign of fraudulent voting at a significant enough of a level to affect an election in all the years I've been involved. So we are basically been working off the assumption that we are fans of good faith and people are going to behave. Now, I admit systems can be broken. People might act not in good faith, but there isn't any good way to prevent such things under our current arrangements. Well, not without making the election so cumbersome as to be unworkable.
Did you have any other questions or comments, Janie?
Nope, I'm just enjoying the conversation.
All right. Well, I thank you for inviting me, and I didn't want to end on a down note because I want to know one of the great things about Worldcon, one of the things that has kept me coming back to it since I first attended at my first ever science fiction convention, the 1984 Worldcon in Anaheim, California. 19-year-old me going, gosh, wow, boy, oh boy. I had found the people I wanted to be with, and I've spent the rest of my life encouraging that and paying that favor forward. So it's a great community. And Sarah, you have taken a step toward joining that community by buying your membership. And don't forget that because you did buy a membership in Discon 3, you will be eligible to make nominations for next year's Hugo Awards. You can't vote on the final ballot, but you'll be able to nominate works for the Hugo Awards.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in addition to that, since you're probably, I'm going to guess there's a chance you might end up joining next year's Worldcon in Chicago as a supporting member, that will make you eligible to vote on the final ballot for the Hugo Awards as well.
Mm-hmm. And that will also, and if you join next year's convention, Sarah, that will also make you eligible to vote for the Hugos in 2023. Well, not to vote, but to nominate for the Hugos 2023. To nominate.
You've already got that because by voting,
supporting membership,
and paying your advanced supporting membership fee, you are already going to be a member, a full member. It's not a full supporting member. Not attending,
but you won't be an attending member, but still supporting.
You'll be a supporting member of the 2023 Worldcon. That means you'll be able to nominate for the Hugo Awards and vote on the Hugo Awards. And also you'll be eligible to vote on the 2025 Worldcon site selection without having to pay twice.
It's just this endless spiral going upward, isn't it?
Well, I told you I was a member of the 1984 Worldcon, and I voted on site selection at that convention, and I've never stopped. So I've only had to pay once every year. I pay even for the few, there were a handful that I did not attend, but I voted on all of them. And so I'm only paying my membership dues 1 year at a time. There is one other thing I might want to mention. This is an advantage to voting. After the election is held, the Worldcon that wins can charge whatever they want for people to attend their convention. However, if you voted, there is a cap good for, I believe it's 90 days. I have to go look at the rule. For the first 90 days, there's a maximum they can charge you who voted. And
what has that been in the past?
I believe it's currently 3 times the voting fee. So, for example, with a $50 fee, the most they could charge to upgrade to attending is another $150 US.
That's pretty sweet.
And they cannot charge voters more than non-voters. So, not that you'd ever want to, but they couldn't make it so, all right, well, if you didn't vote, it'll cost you $100, but if you voted, it'll cost $150. Well, that can't be done. You
know? Okay, that's good to know.
All right, I think I've covered everything. There's a lot of little bits and pieces in there, and I will say for the record that if I have made any mistakes here, the rules that are in the World Science Fiction Society's Constitution, which is at WSFS.org, always take priority over anything we've said here.
Yeah. So basically, if you have any questions, that is one good place to go. Or you can also email the Discon 3 people. And they do have a contact email on their website. In the site, I believe it is actually in the site selection voting page. And you
Yeah,
can
I think
ask
so.
them questions as well.
That's right.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
Vote. Encourage your friends to vote.
Yes.
3 words: vote, vote, and vote.
Yes. Vote early, but not often.
Yeah.
And if you're not attending, by the way, if you're not attending, then do as Sarah did. If you still want to vote, you can go ahead and send your ballot in now and count that. As we get a little bit closer, we'll come up to a point where it's too late to send them in electronically. Even there's got to be a cutoff where they're printing everything and putting them together.
The deadline for electronic is December 14th
Yeah, I was gonna say.
at noon EST.
Which is not bad because that's pretty close to the convention starts just a couple days later.
Yeah, and
there
the voting closes at the convention on December 17th at 6 p.m.
Right.
EST.
That's right. If you get even closer than that, and if you decide you don't trust the email or the paper mail, you can also print out your ballot and prepare it and give it to someone else who is going to the convention and then they can deliver it to site selection on your behalf. I have done that. I have had that happen. I've had people contact me when I was at the Worldcon in Japan saying, "We forgot to vote. Can I fax my ballot to the hotel and have you deliver it for me?" And I said, "Okay, yes, go ahead."
How many did you end up with?
Just 2. It was a
Okay,
couple.
that's not bad.
I'm not going to give their names, but one of them is somebody who chaired a Worldcon and ought to have known better. So
Thank you so much, everybody, for taking part in this. Janie, was there anything you'd like to add, or are we ready to wrap?
We're ready to wrap.
Thank you to everyone who participated. Thank you, Sarah, Kevin, Petrea, and of course, Janie. I'm Lori E. Smith, the social media host for the Winnipeg in 2023 Worldcon Bid Committee. And I would like to thank all of you who are watching. Vote, vote, vote. And thank you for attending. Take care, everybody.